I was terrified. Seeing my dad degenerating physically over that time, and I'm across the country working. I was the only person in my peer group I knew that was dealing with a similar experience. I didn't know anybody my age that had dealt with chronic illness in their immediate family, especially taking on the responsibility that I did. I thought, statistically, I know other people. Mm-hmm. And statistically, this is affecting a lot of us, and we should be talking about this.
From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about the changing nature of work and how that work is changing all of us. So I want to start by telling you about exactly one moment in my life last spring. I'd gotten a call that my mother needed to have emergency heart surgery. She's fine, don't worry. She's in her early 70s, and so I dropped everything and drove the 3 hours up to where she lives to be there in the waiting room when she woke up. And I moved so quickly that I forgot to organize pickup for my kindergartner, who definitely needed someone at the school at the end of the school day. I was working that out on text from the hospital waiting room when I got a call from my producer at Hello Monday. She had a totally normal question. We were able to figure it out really quickly. But as I hung up the phone with Sarah, I thought, is this for real? Like, am I really doing this? Am I really trying to figure out how to navigate my son's care, my mother's care, and my full-time job at the same time, and nobody can see that I'm doing it because I'm doing it from my phone? Here's the thing. That experience is so familiar for all of us. Whether you are a person who's in the middle of it right now, or whether you report to work every day with a whole lot of people who maybe aren't going to tell you that they too are on the cell phone from the hospital waiting room with their son's teacher on the other line. It's a lot, this caregiving. Today's guest is Jennifer Levin. She has a new book out called Generation Care. Jennifer is an author and a writer and a really smart individual. A number of years ago, when she found herself in the unfortunate position of having to balance a very intense full-time job and care for her father quite early in her life. I mean, she was in her early 30s. Jennifer started a Facebook group for millennial and Gen X caregivers. In today's conversation, Jennifer is going to share a lot about her own experience coming into adulthood as a caregiver. My hope for today's episode is that Jennifer's story will make you feel seen, and that as you listen to the choices that she made and the things that she has learned, you will hear a lot of things that you can take back to your own environment. Because like I said, whether you are the person who is actively sitting in that hospital waiting room, taking the call from your kid's school, or whether you are reporting to work every day alongside a whole lot of people who probably are doing the same thing, this is a moment when caregiving is overwhelming, and understanding it in the context of what we do every day, well, it's seminal to the future of work. Here's Jennifer Levin.
I was 28, I think, when I wrote my first episode of TV. I was working what was a very cool job from the outside and what was very grueling hours, but still cool from the inside. And around that time, my always healthy dad, staunchly independent, he started displaying some cognitive signs that were unusual for him. My mom and I both recognized it. They were divorced, and she would talk to him on the phone, though, and heard some things, and we thought, this is not himself. Eventually, he went to the neurologist, was first diagnosed with Parkinson's, but couldn't tell him no. You know, the guy's still going to live his life, as you should, really. Mm-hmm. And then that ended up not even being the accurate diagnosis. We found out later that he actually had progressive supranuclear palsy, PSP.
I'm going to guess that a lot of our community has not actually heard of this disease.
Right. And we had not either when my dad was diagnosed. It displays initially like Parkinson's, or it can. It is considered a Parkinsonian disease, but it is a neurological degenerative disease that actually presents more like ALS. So it weakens your muscles, including like your throat muscles, over the course of time. For some people, like my dad, quite quickly over the course of a few years. For other people, over the course of decades.
Right.
And, you know, when your throat muscles are impacted and weakened, that impacts speech, it impacts swallowing. That's when things get very dangerous. Yeah. So although cognitively he was all there, it was so effortful for him to get words out as the disease progressed.
So in short, what did this mean for your life in your career over the course of the next few years?
I got one phone call from my mom. I was 32 at this point. I get a phone call that, my mom hasn't talked to my dad. I haven't talked to my dad. I talk to my dad every day. So it was weird that I'm calling, he's not picking up. My mom's calling, he's not picking up. And he was living in assisted living at the time.
Okay.
And we called the administration and said, go knock on his door. Have you seen him? And they said, oh, he didn't show up to lunch. Well, assisted living, in my dad's case, was pretty independent. He could come and go from the building. He could go to meals if he wanted. He didn't have to. And, we said, that's not normal. Please go check on him. And at the end of the day, he had fallen in his bathroom and was laying there for hours.
Yeah.
And was hospitalized for the fall. And so I had to get to New York very quickly because assisted living policy was that he was now considered a fall risk and needed to be in a nursing home because they couldn't provide the level of supervision.
I want to just stop there because I think, as you say that, I think about, last spring my mother had a heart issue and was hospitalized and she fell. And I just remember what it felt like to learn that my mom had been on the floor and to know that I was 4 hours away and hadn't been there and hadn't known about it. And to know that we were facing now a future where that was a possibility. And I say that not to compare my experience to yours, but to open the door for the fact that this experience that you're talking about is one that so many people have. We don't talk about it well, but we have it. And for you to have it at 32, that's really young.
Very young. Very much, I was the only person in my peer group I knew that was dealing with a similar experience. I am an only child, and that didn't help. Even emotionally, I didn't have somebody to turn to that was going through the same experience that I was. I didn't know anybody my age that had dealt with chronic illness in their immediate family, where it was really, especially taking on the responsibility that I did. And so not only that, I'm getting some of these phone calls while I'm at work. And I'm going to take them because, of course, I am. But, you're trying to portray one version of yourself.
Right.
As we discussed, of like, here I am. I can do it all. I can do it great.
Nailing it.
Yeah.
And you're definitely not very senior yet at 32 either. You haven't earned the right to just step out of the meeting without blinking. Right?
No. At 32, I had decided I was feeling burnt out from my job life.
Yeah.
And I kind of was holding an anger towards the industry where I felt like I had been taken advantage of in some ways, and that the industry kind of enabled that. And on the other hand, I have, my dad, my family going through this circumstance that, looking back on it now, I think I was just feeling a complete lack of control as a control freak, you know, in regards to my work. I thought, screw this. I'm going to do this on my own. I'm going to write on my own. I'm represented and have more flexibility for my life. So I really made that intentional decision to give myself more space. And that was helpful in my dealing with my dad's illness because at a certain point, I no longer had to say to my boss, I got to go.
Right.
I'm not explaining why. But I'll see you later.
But that fork in the road, right, is also a fork in the road that many people confront. And when they are carrying the weight of caregiving, they make the decision to choose a more flexible path. And thankfully, we live in a world where often there are more flexible paths available to us. But they also involve compromises. So I'm curious, we can see a lot of what you have gained in taking that path. I mean, certainly in the book that we're reading, right? It's a product of that path.
Right.
What did you leave behind? What did you lose?
Stability. I left, a 401k package, benefits that I didn't have to pay out of pocket for, and colleagues that I saw every day, especially being a writer, which is such a solitary, path to take, but also doing it alone without a writer's room or without people that you're regularly interacting with. that also has a mental health toll that I really have to work on so that it doesn't eat me up.
Yeah, I really hear that. So you published this story in Cosmopolitan, and then what happened?
It was after my father passed away. I saw the statistic of how many caregivers were millennials. At the time, 1 in 4, over 10 million. And this is now going on 10 years ago.
And how are you thinking about defining a caregiver?
At the time, I was not thinking about it at all. I did not consider myself a caregiver. I was a daughter doing what my dad needed. But I read this study that really demystified it. And it showed that being a caregiver is not a nurse's aide necessarily, like I thought it was, or being, a much older, probably retiree, probably woman who's caring for a geriatric parent or an aging spouse. A unpaid family caregiver, well, now we have some paid family caregivers, which is great, but being a family caregiver can entail anything from living with the person and caring for them 24/7, or it can be, like me, long distance, who is doing more of a managerial role of organizing health insurance, doctor's appointments, diagnoses, making sure prescriptions are filled, being there in emergencies, moving someone into an assisted living facility, and being the facilitator of all of these, life needs of the person you care for. And it can be in between, which I also was, being present for doctor's appointments, managing things on a more micro level without doing absolutely everything yourself. And so family caregiving is this title that so many people don't apply to themselves because I think they don't really understand what it is.
And you're really looking at like separate from raising children, right? You are looking at caregiving adults in your life.
Yes. And some children that have special needs that are, medical based more or neurological, but right, chronic illness, disease, a short term, emergency, like a stroke maybe is considered a short-term emergency.
Right.
Somebody recuperates. I think often people don't want to use the caregiver term, in my opinion, because they think it implies that this person is dying. Yeah. And that's just not true all the time.
Interesting.
And so, it doesn't have to be so, frankly, depressing.
Yeah.
To use this term.
It feels to me, though, that what you're talking about to some degree can be summed up in a more casual way by saying it's any time that the degree of care you're taking for someone else causes you to look up and say, but where's the grown-up in the room? Surely that's not me.
Oh, absolutely. And when you realize it is.
Yeah, yeah. So let's go back to scoping out the size of this phenomenon in our country specifically. You said that you read some research.
Sure. I read this research and I thought, one, oh, wow, I think I was a caregiver and I had no idea. And two, I felt completely alone in this circumstance, and I didn't really tell. My close friends knew some of it, but definitely not all of it. That I thought, statistically, I know other people. And statistically, this is affecting a lot of us, and we should be talking about this. A big-mouthed New Yorker writer, I thought, we have to talk about this. We have to, because you don't get anything in return, meaning support, meaning acknowledgement, and not even because of a pat on the back, but just of understanding why you couldn't show up to that pre-planned meeting or even dinner with your friends because there was an emergency, just any level of understanding. So I thought, I'm going to write about this. And I chose Cosmo. I went straight to them with the pitch because I wanted to approach young women in a place that they wouldn't necessarily be expecting to read about caregiving. Because I thought if I didn't realize I was a caregiver, a lot of people are probably also living a similar experience. They don't realize they're caregivers, but they will relate to my story in some way. Yeah. And at the time, I also decided to start an online support group for caregivers who are my age because I realized when I was looking into resources support, everything was geared towards people that were much older, in a different time of life, had more time to build identity building, but finances, some sort of financial cushion. Maybe we're already retired and had lived what I was still building. Yeah. And so I started my group, which is called Caregiver Collective. I did it through Facebook so that people could find it easily. Yeah. And it could be, not just local, but national and not bound to showing up to a place and time, which often caregivers don't really have control over their schedule in that way. And the group grew so quickly. And not only that, I received so much feedback from that article. People I didn't know, people I did know and had grown up with, telling me that they were living a similar circumstance, also reinforcing the idea that they felt alone in it. And I find that as identifying as a caregiver, or at least saying I'm taking on a caregiver role, whatever that feels like to you that's best, you can then start to say, okay, this isn't everything. It doesn't need to be. What are the other parts of my life? How can I, as a therapist that I interviewed for the book, stated, think about the buckets of your life, or the bar graph. And, there's caregivers, one bar. Your career is another bar. Maybe you love listening to music. That's another bar. Maybe you're a parent. That's another bar. If caregiving is such a priority right now and it's taking up so much time, now that I've identified these other bars, how can I feed into them in ways that feel accessible to me?
One thing about caregiving, you tell me if I'm wrong, but often it doesn't feel like something you sign up for. It's not something that you want. It's something that happens. And so you are called to step into that role. You can choose it or not. But often there's the resentment that comes from not wanting it.
Yes.
Did you experience that at all?
I felt resentment, not for the role, because I just wanted to help my dad. I resented how I felt like I was doing everything myself. I did have my mom showing up at times when I couldn't be there. And I don't just mean to doctor's appointments. I mean just to spend time with my dad.
Yeah.
But I really resented all of the little things that are big things that need to be done, because it's not only doctor's appointments and hospital visits. It's also, does he have food in the fridge? He just bought a bookcase and it needs being put together, but he can't do it. So who's going to do it?
I can barely keep that stuff straight in my own life.
Yeah. And I think also being in my early 30s, it felt like an accomplishment that I could do it in my own life. Like people should look at me and say, well done. It's not just like a given that I can conduct myself as a human being.
I think that's so true, in particular in your early 30s. Okay, so we can't talk about this any longer without talking about the wackadoo system in which we live that relies so strongly on unpaid family labor. I think many of us feel like the system is just unsustainable. So what is your recommendation for policymakers and for people in government to begin to help us out here?
I mean, I would say it doesn't feel unsustainable. It frankly just is. Because the way I see it is that we have a society that relies on a care infrastructure that it refuses to create. And it has forced this informal care structure that most of us, frankly, have stepped into at one point in our lives. And if you do it at a younger age, we'll probably do multiple times in your life.
Most of us will become a caregiver at some point, many times over.
When I was writing about this, I really saw, why does this feel so particular to my generation, but also Gen X and Gen Z rising, right? And I notice it's because we have more family caregivers that are taking this on at a younger age than ever before.
Yep.
And I not only thought, oh my God, but I thought, why? Why is this so unique now? And you see that with medical advancements, thank God. People are living longer with chronic illness and disease, and doing that at home than ever before.
Yep.
We also have transitioned to this hospital-to-home system I think it was in the late 90s, if I'm remembering my research correctly, that, it's great that you can get, if you need medical infusions for 4 weeks after you've been treated for an acute illness at the hospital, you can now receive that at home. But who's going to help you with that?
Yeah.
They haven't set up that part of it. The medical part has been great. Like,
right.
Look how well you're doing and doing outside of the hospital. But who's helping you to do that? That part has been pretty neglected.
At the same time, it feels like the economic realities for families have changed. So that, the parents who raised me, my mother's full-time job was raising us for a lot of our childhood. And that was possible in most of the families in our community. It didn't mean that they chose it, but it was possible. And that is often untenable for millennials and certainly for Gen Z. And so whereas you might have actually had the available unpaid labor in your family by design, it's far more likely that you don't now.
Absolutely. I mean, we have two options for care at home, right? The unpaid labor that you're talking about of you and me who are helping out parents at certain points in our life while we're also working. But then we have paid labor, right? The nurses' aides that I thought caregivers were. And at this moment, we are in a healthcare worker shortage. So when you ask, what would I say to policymakers? Twofold. Help the paid caregivers and help the unpaid caregivers. Because when I polled my my caregiver group, I had always thought that the solution, so to speak, for this is paid family leave.
Yeah.
Everyone I spoke to, it's one thing that we are lacking in this country that almost every other country is not. And it's one thing that could really help keep people employed while they're caregivers, not only because they're able to retain their jobs and won't be discriminated by being fired for taking time off, but some people don't take time off because they won't be paid for it and they just can't afford that.
Did you have that? Did you have that as an option? Could you have taken any sort of leave?
I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. I thought, a TV show is run by a corporation. They must have some policies. We probably even got handouts on it.
Right.
I never once thought to ask. Not once.
Well, you're getting at the fact that in every office there is the policy and then there's the culture. And they're very rarely fully in alignment.
Absolutely. That's the thing, is that it seemed like my problem to deal with, my out of work problem to deal with.
As you think about like the choices that you have now in your career, do you feel like having taken that fork in the road that gave you a more flexible environment, if you wanted to, now that the caregiving burden is a bit less than it was during that period, could you go back to a more traditional 9 to 5?
If I did, it would be in bursts. It would not be all year round for years on end. This has led me to view my life much differently and to nurture all parts of it and to see how important that is. When you're dealing with a medical emergency, somebody you really care about, versus your daily life, at work, you think this is a no-brainer. And so seeing that in really stark contrast and what I was giving to the level that I was giving it, I just, for me personally, don't feel like that's how life should be lived.
Yeah. Well, what you're articulating, by the way, is something that I see often when I'm talking to women about their careers, women only because often it's women who are at this table with me, that happens for them sometime in midlife, like when they have gotten well into the most senior positions. That's when they stop and reassess and think, what are we doing here, right? And one unintentional consequence of being called out early in this way is that you hit the fast forward button on that career realization.
Right. And, I think about this now and I feel very fortunate that this happened at that point in my life. And it happened, at a time when it did feel like I was throwing a lot away in a sense, which ultimately was not true.
Right.
But, and it also came with a major financial hit as a consequence.
Yeah.
And that is something that, adds stress in other ways. I realize in retrospect that I was always going to be a writer. That was never a question to me because I just am that. But I did change what I write about and how I write it. I had never before put myself out there, like in that Cosmo article you mentioned. I'd never before put information about my family out there to anyone, let alone written about it.
Yeah.
But then seeing the response of like how many people spoke up to me personally and how that was a small win because they had never shared it with anybody. And now they'd shared it with one person. And then people joining this group, admitting that this is what they're going through. Then you mentioned earlier the language we use to talk about this. So often people don't have the language. And when you start talking to other people living a similar experience, you find that language, you hear it from others, then you can share it as you feel with people in your life. And so I feel incredibly grateful that younger in my life, I kind of had the cojones, frankly, to speak frankly and share it through my writing and have my career kind of start to take that path.
I love that. And also, you're still pretty young in your career. And so I look forward to reading what you write in the future.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Last question.
Mhm.
If we were to reimagine what support for caregivers could look like in this country, what's the first change you'd want to see?
Like 5 popped up in my mind all at once. I would say so much of in our country, because we are career forward, happens first in the workplace, like with parental leave. And I'm seeing that with caregiving as well, because we don't have national paid family leave, because we don't even have it, it's state by state. Only 14 states have it. And when you lack the policies, you lack the conversation, you increase the stigma. And that's been found to be true within companies. And so one report I was reading was about how the more parental policies you have at work, the more destigmatized that is, the more people find each other, they support each other. And caregiving is really behind in that. We're only starting to bring this into the conversation at a corporate level in the last decade or so. And even now, it's not widespread, right? So I would say really what I would like to see is people identifying themselves as caregivers, which is kind of a major first step, even if you're deep in the role like I was. And then as you feel comfortable, I would say, being honest with the people in your life. And for many of us, that's coworkers. Because then if you find that, and you will, I'm pretty sure of this, you will find other people who are living something that is similar, even though it feels so personal to you. Then you can begin to say, well, we work for the same company. How can we approach our company for support if it's not already offered? How can we create a corporate culture of care where even if you offer benefits, the employees know about these benefits? They're not hidden in some paperwork that you get day one. And also that they're being utilized from the top down, that there's a model being, instituted in which people feel comfortable and emboldened to use these policies. Because without this, people often leave the workforce because they can't manage both, or because paying for care out of pocket is so expensive that it's cheaper for them to provide the care themselves than to stay in their own job and having income. So I would say bringing this into the dialogue, having corporations institute a corporate culture of care so that eventually the federal government passes on, it gets passed to them as like, hey, this is something that can be done effectively. Nobody loses out. People actually win, corporations and employees alike, families definitely. And let's, change the structure that we've created here that is so at odds with how we're actually living. And let's have it reflect back to us our best instincts, which is care for each other. That's what I think.
That was Jennifer Levin. Her new book is called Generation Care. Find it wherever you buy your books. And I want you to walk away remembering 3 important things from this conversation. First off, nearly all of us are going to end up taking on caregiving roles at some point over the course of our careers. Whether it is for younger people or older people or everybody all at once, it's likely that if you're not in this role now, you will be. And if you are in this role, well, that brings me to point number 2. Caregiving is real work. Our government's infrastructure suggests that we don't think of it as real work. There are not nearly as many tools and services available to us as we need in order to be successful at caregiving and successful in our roles as professionals. And this brings us to our final point. Talking about it is the path forward. We need to be talking about it with our closest friends who will give us the emotional support we need to bridge difficult days. We need to be talking about it with our colleagues and with our managers, and to ask for their support and respect as we're making difficult trade-offs and decisions. And we need to talk about it in a public landscape. We need policymakers to be aware of the toll that this takes on work, on productivity. Now, we will talk about all of this at office hours this week. I'm getting together with our senior producer, Sarah Storms, the very same Sarah who called me while I was sitting in the hospital waiting on my mom's surgery. We are going to talk about the trade-offs involved in caregiving and balancing our career. We will get together at 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday afternoon, as we always do. You can find the link in the show notes, or you can go to LinkedIn News, and we will be there. Now, if this episode left you thinking and feeling seen, you might want to share it with somebody who could use it. And join us right here next week back in the studio for another episode of Hello Monday. Thanks for listening.